I'm not a patent lawyer, right? But the interesting thing is everybody tells you, "Oh, you're going to make a lot of money as a patent lawyer because they're in huge demand, right?" And you're just going to be offered great jobs and all that. And after seeing it and being in there, I came home like 6 months into it, and I said to my wife, "Yeah, I got to find a new job because this is melting my brain. I cannot do this." And that's actually how we got to Florida, because her entire family had moved down to Florida. By the way, this was all up in New York, right? So I'm a Long Island guy, and her whole family had moved down here. So I started looking for a position in Florida, and that job at that tech company was so good to me because I told you the options, but also I met all these executives, and so they all moved to different companies.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. This is going to be a good one today. We're going to learn a lot today. We've got Ed Alexander is joining us. And Ed, his practice, he's a transaction lawyer primarily, and he has represented a lot of law firms in sales and purchases. And so if you have any plan ever to sell your practice or maybe even buy practice, definitely going to want to listen to this. We're going to dive deep into this, some of the issues that Ed has seen. And even if you think you never want to sell, my opinion is if you build it as if you might be able to sell it, you're going to increase the value and the joy of running the practice all along the way. So you should listen even if you think you never want to sell. So anyway, Ed, welcome. Why don't you tell us about yourself, where you are, what the name of your firm is, and what you do.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, so my firm is Alexander Business Law, and I'm in Orlando, Florida. I've been here for 31 years doing this. So transactional lawyer from the beginning. And I guess I should say I had a little bit of experience with litigation, commercial litigation, when I was a young lawyer, and they needed help in one department versus the other kind of thing. But I quickly determined that was not for me. So I've been transactional lawyer for really my entire career, which is over 31 years. Yeah.
Well, the other thing I want to explore, law is your second career, right? You did not start out as a lawyer. Were you an engineer? What?
Yeah, I was a systems engineer. I was working for a company that built custom integrated circuits, so the little chips that you see inside the computer. And they were designing chips that were doing the conversion from analog to digital that was occurring in the auto industry. So it was really a fascinating time to do that work.
That's another thing we have in common. I got a degree in industrial and systems engineering. I never really was an engineer. I co-opted during school, but I never really, after school, I didn't practice as an engineer. So why?
The education is, just wonderful, right? Because it's like law school in a way. It has a method it teaches you how to think about things and mathematics and physics and the ways of the real world. So I loved it, just like I loved law school. But yeah. And then I moved from there into doing product marketing for a technology company. And that was really cool because I got to go out and do deals. And it was really the first time I'd ever done deals. And I started to interface with, it was a larger company. It was a New York Stock Exchange traded company, and got my first taste of stock options. It was a really exciting time and everything like that. And I worked with in-house counsel, and I really decided this is a cool job. I think I might want to do this job. And so I actually went to law school at night while I was still a product marketing manager, which is something you can only do in your late 20s and early 30s because it will just absolutely wipe you out. I was traveling various places, and I would come back and run off to law school so I could go, and then the next, go home at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, do a little bit of work, turn around, get up at 4 a.m. and go out and do it again, and it was like insane.
Yikes.
So.
That is intense. That is intense. It's funny too. I'll just say most. My impression is most lawyers basically went straight through undergrad into law school and then start practicing law. They don't have that experience. And then they get into law, a lot of them, and they're like, I hate this. I want to get out. The grass is always greener. Where you did the opposite. You're like, you were in business and marketing and all these things. And you say, no, I'd rather be a lawyer. So what made you think that's what you wanted to do?
I wanted to do deals. I love putting deals together, right? And after a while, when we were doing these deals with these technology things, there's intellectual property issues, there's finance issues, there's all these issues. And, we're putting them all together, and I'm working with the lawyers, and I'm, you're kind of seeing how they think and how they do things. And like, oh, that's really interesting, So that's what made me want to be a lawyer, is doing deals.
So you had a full-time job. You went to night school to get your law degree. You graduate. What's next? Do you go to a firm? Are you working for a company? Do you start your own firm? How does that play out?
So yeah, the company I was working for offered me a position in the legal department. Now, the only problem was that the only position they had was in patent, which would have worked, as you think about it from an engineering perspective, right? The problem with it is that I went from what I really wanted to do was go out and talk to people and put deals together. And now I'm sitting in a 12 by 12 office with, people shoving inventions in front of me and me having to write down and describe those inventions. So,
when so I went to Georgia Tech. So when I was in law school or right when I got out and people heard they're like, you're a lawyer and you went to Georgia Tech. All of them are like, oh, so you're a patent lawyer. I got that all the time. I'm like, no, I do not. No, I'm not a patent lawyer. Sounds like you actually got to see it for a little while and you're like, yeah, I'm out of here.
Yeah, I'm not a patent lawyer, right? But the interesting thing is everybody tells you, oh, you're going to make a lot of money as a patent lawyer because they're in huge demand, right? And you're just going to be offered great jobs and all that. And after seeing it and being in there, I came home like 6 months into it, and I said to my wife, yeah, I got to find a new job because this is melting my brain. I cannot do this, And that's actually how we got to Florida, because her entire family had moved down to Florida. By the way, this was all up in New York, right? So I'm a Long Island guy, and her whole family had moved down here. So I started looking for a position in Florida, and that job at that tech company was so good to me because I told you the options, but also I met all these executives. And so, they all moved to different companies. So when I got down here, there was a guy who was the CEO of a company here. And I said to him, hey, can I do your work for you? And he said, well, I can't do that because, you're kind of new and we got to have somebody else. But I'll tell you what, I'll call the firm that does our work and tell them to hire you. And that's how I got my first job. So it was great.
Nice. So you go there and you said you were doing a little bit of litigation. How did that, when you got there, I guess you're an associate, you're doing a little bit of everything, or did you focus pretty quickly?
So I work for a partner who was a transactional guy. And he was fantastic too, really nice guy, and really took time to show me the ropes and all of that. And, so when he had deals, I'd be working for him completely. But occasionally, things would slow down as they do in a transactional practice. And so the litigation folks would be going and they'd say, oh, well, we can use you over here, just to keep your hours up. So that's how I got my taste of litigation.
So here, we've got this hearing. Here's the file. Go cover it for us.
That actually happened.
Man.
So it's like the lawyer says, there's one of the partners, he's like, hey, there's a hearing in Jacksonville. I want you to go up and cover it. I'm like, I don't know anything about this. He's like, yeah, you'll do fine. So I got up there, and it's these 3 Jacksonville plaintiffs lawyers against my client, right? And the judge knows all of those plaintiffs lawyers, has no idea on earth who I am, basically let me open my mouth for about 2 seconds, ruled in favor of the plaintiffs lawyers, and then sent me on my way. And, I was devastated, and I went back to the partner. I was like, oh man, I'm so sorry. I lost and all of this. It's like, you had no chance to win. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. It always starts that way. It's no big deal. All you got to do is just show up and say hello. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. That was that's hilarious. So eventually you started your own firm. And so, the question I have for most people is, some people sort of always knew they were going to do it. They just sort of always had that plan or had a feeling they were going to do it. And then there's others that really had no plan at all to do it, and it just sort of happened for one reason or another. What camp do you fall in?
I was always interested in it. I had played with the idea of doing it, but then I got the job, and it never seemed right. Right. So, but I got the ultimate kick in the pants because the firm I was at, the partners broke up. You know, they were very nice people altogether, but for whatever reason, it didn't work for them. Yeah. And then two of the partners said, "Hey, come over and go to this firm with us. We're forming a new firm." And then 4 months later, that firm broke up. And I was very agitated. So my wife we had two kids, one of whom was literally a little baby when this whole thing exploded. I mean, she was probably 8 or 9 months old. And I remember them telling us that the firm was breaking up, and would it be over like at the end of the month, or that kind of thing. And I knew where my wife was. She was at like a mommy and me thing. And so I drove over there, and as soon as she saw me walk through the door, she knew something was awry. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't want to tell you this over the phone, and so then I said, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. But luckily I had a transaction going on from a client that I brought into the firm. And so that really sustained us for a couple months so I could get everything going. That was a stroke of luck right there.
Yes, that's the other piece. When people go out, some have a client or some clients or some matters, and others have nothing. And so luckily you had something, but that's going to come to an end. You saw the end of it. What's going through your mind? You got a baby. You got to bring in the money. I'm sure I don't know, are you scared, or are you just like, all right, now I'm going to go get clients? What did you do to fill the pipeline?
Yeah, no, I mean, I had already started to get to know people in the Orlando area. So I really put out the word that, hey, I'm doing my own gig. And people would send stuff, mostly garbage stuff, but it paid the bills. So that was okay. And I did it for, a while and got the marketing machine rolling. And it just takes time and effort. And when I wasn't working on cases, which, a lot of times wasn't a lot, I would be out there meeting with people, doing coffee, doing lunch, whatever it took to get our name out there and start talking. But it can be completely overwhelming, right? I remember this time. So this is like 96, right? And I'm trying to set up a computer in the office to connect to the internet. And I can't get this thing to work for everything. And it's just like the little thing that just sends you over the edge. And, there was so much stress and pressure. I got to make money, doing all that kind of stuff. And I tell you, it was just like the easiest little thing just tripped the wire. I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do this, And luckily, Faith was like, my wife was like, oh, take it easy. We'll get this. And, kind of plugs the thing into the wall. And she's like, yeah, we're good now.
It's those sorts of moments. I think we all have them, and they never go away. They just change. They're just different. These moments of self-doubt. I do want to talk a little later. We're not going to get there yet, but you've got your marketing has gotten very sophisticated and impressive. And so you've learned a lot over the years. I want to get into that a little later. But before we do, you start out, I assume you're just doing transactional work. At some point, your practice evolves to where you're doing mainly sort of, I think, business transactions. And then another component of your practice, I guess, or it's sort of a side gig or a adjacent type company, is you also co-own a sort of a business brokerage. So take me through sort of how you got there, how that sort of came about. Did you do it immediately, or did that just sort of organically grow along the way?
The business brokerage happened so I had a client who was looking to sell their business, and they asked me if I knew a broker I could refer them to. And I didn't know any brokers that I trusted enough to refer them to. And so they said, well, there's this guy in our neighborhood, and so we'll send him to you to talk to you, and you tell us what you think of him. So he sent me the listing agreement, which I promptly ripped apart. And I met with him and I said, listen, here's the deal. Because the listing agreement had a bunch of different things in it. But I said, you sell the business, you get paid. That's the deal we want to have, right? And he's like, yeah, I can live with that. And this business, they wanted way more than I ever thought this business was worth. And they wanted cash. And so I, kind of thought, well, this isn't really going to work out. But then he sold it for cash at that price. I was like, oh, this is a pretty good deal. So I got to know him. And that was probably 2005. And then we did a couple more deals together. And, we pulled these deals together that looked like they were going to fracture and fall apart. And then we said, oh, maybe we should work together more frequently. So that's how we formed the brokerage.
It's interesting in life how these opportunities sort of come across your desk and they start out, as maybe a little seed. And then over time they grow into, a big tree or a plant. And it sounds like that's sort of what happened here. And, other folks out there, when I started my firm, all these opportunities, that was one thing that sort of surprised me. When I was at a firm, I really didn't see the opportunities. I don't know why. I don't know if they just didn't come across my desk or what. And then when I was on my own, it's like, oh, you can do this, you can do that, you can do this. And one of the hard things was figuring out what to say no to.
That is a huge issue. And a lot of, that can distract so many people, right? Because there's all these shiny pennies everywhere. What shiny penny am I going to go after? Yeah. So sticking with a core and kind of recognizing those opportunities within your core niche or core service is really the important part. So how do you make that distinction?
Yeah, trial and error. I've gotten plenty distracted in the past. I'm a lot better now. I'll say that. I've gotten better now. There's only so much time, energy, money, bandwidth you've got. And there's so many opportunities. I'll probably misstate it. This is a deal of a lifetime. And you see like maybe 2 or 3 of those a year. It's like you can pass on this.
Yes.
There's gonna be another one. There's gonna be another one. It may be better.
That's right.
So
yeah,
that, I wish I could say I'm really good at it, but I've gotten better. But I'm not perfect. That's for sure. So you've mentioned your wife Faith, who I've had the pleasure of meeting and having dinner with, and so she works with you at your firm. Has she always worked with you at your firm, or did that sort of change over time?
That changed over time. So I guess, she'd work part-time when the kids were in school and that kind of thing. But she really assumed a more prevalent role probably in 2014, somewhere in that range, 2013, 2014. And she really is the firm administrator. And she's got a great, fantastic skill set in terms of the numbers and understanding how things operate here. And, I was thinking about this before the call. Is like, the distinction is I love numbers. I put together models. And then she takes those models and she goes, yeah, that isn't accurate. This is what you have to do. And she'll plug in the numbers to make, the things to make them accurate. So she would never do the model and I would never plug in the numbers to make them accurate. So together it works out really well.
Well, that's good. I've talked to folks and know folks who work with their spouse. And then I talked to others who are like, I cannot imagine ever working with my spouse. It would just not work. But it sounds like you guys have figured it out and it works well for you too.
It definitely works well. We've been married 40 years. So that's, there's a dynamic there, right? So yeah, she's got her space and I have my space. And she would be, if you follow EOS or anything, she's kind of the integrator. She's the second, right? I always have trouble with that one rule in EOS that says that if the integrator says no, then it's no matter how good your idea is. But so yeah, she is definitely the integrator.
Well, that's good to have. And somebody you fully trust there. That's huge and that's hard to find. So I'm glad you guys are able to make that work. We've talked a lot, changing subjects a little bit. We've talked in the past and we talked a little bit before we got on about hiring, attracting talent. And, it is a struggle for, it seems like every law firm owner I talk to, and myself included. What sorts of things have you seen? What sorts of issues and how have you dealt with the talent issue along the way?
Yeah, some of the problem we get is a lot of people, when we post an ad or do something, they'll just throw their resume at it and it's not even close. So there's an enormous filtering component that has to go on. from what you're getting in there. And then in the past, up until very recently, we're getting very few qualified. We'd get a ton of responses, but very few of them would be qualified for what we were looking for. And then we also have we asked them to tell us why they're the best candidate for the job, why they liked the advertisement, and then to give us their 3 books. And I don't really care what their 3 books are. I just want them to follow the instructions, because if they're not following instructions before they have the job, it usually doesn't work after they have the job. And you'd be surprised how many people just don't do those simple little things, and again, whatever the response is, it's fine. All I'm looking for is that you actually read the ad and followed the instructions.
So you bake that into your job posting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's key. I may have to ask you offline. I'm in the market now, so.
That's actually Faith's bailiwick. She handles that piece. We put together the job description together, all right? So that then feeds into the advertisement. And I'll just give you a little piece. So I send it to my daughter, who has more employees than I do, who is a millennial and who really sets them up for millennials. Like, so, hey, Dad, this is the way boomers would done the ad. I'm going to show you how to do a millennial ad. And that's, so there's my secret sauce.
All right. I'm going to talk to her too. I get that. So what's your current sort of employee stack or structure of your firm? So it's you and Faith, and what else do you have there?
We have 2 staff members. So one is client service and marketing, and then the others are a legal assistant. We have 2 attorneys. Both of them are kind of part-time, stay-at-home parents type of thing. And then we're looking for, right now, full-time paralegal.
Yeah. And is that going to be a hybrid, in-house, remote, or do you care?
I'm thinking in-house, because I've noticed with the hybrid people that communication is a little stilted. It's so much easier to have a face-to-face communication than it is to have to set up a call and be on a phone and that kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe that's the boomer in me, but that's the way I think.
I'm similar. I like in office, but part of it may just be, I just don't know how to do it. I just, I got to figure that out. We'll see. Well, cool. Well, I appreciate giving you a background on your firm. Now let's talk about your practice. And a big part of your practice now is representing lawyers, law firms in, I'll just call, purchase and sale of law practices. And so that might mean a lot of different things. So why don't you sort of explain the different scenarios that you get involved with when somebody is sort of transitioning to practice, we'll say.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at the a practice transition in particular, there's really 2 flavors of it that I put in. One is kind of the external transaction, and the other is the internal transaction. So you might say the internal transaction is kind of adding a partner, but putting the succession plan in at the time that you add the partner. So that question is addressed at the start and we don't have to negotiate later on. And then the other one is the external sale. So kind of the way that we do it is we want to get a baseline of where we are today. We call that the reality check. So it's like, okay, what's the financial performance? How many people do you have? Where is your business coming from? We want to kind of do a complete analysis on the firm. And then we look at, okay, well, who is on your team that maybe you want to add on as an equity holder? And if you don't have anybody, what's your window for doing a succession, right? Is it 10 years or is it next year, right? So that's kind of going to give us the realm. But yeah, so then we take from there and we feed all this information back to the owner. And we have the owner kind of give us, okay, well, with that, this is now what I want to do. And so there really are 3 options, right? So I want to put some work into the practice and make it grow and be what I really want it to be, or maybe what I need for my retirement, one of the 2. Do we have somebody we can bring on board or that's on board that would be a good candidate, or do we need to now market outside? So those kinds of 3 options that they have.
Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. So in your experience, is there a certain type that you see more of, an internal versus an external?
Internal by far.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because it's the lowest risk transaction there is. The big issue that people have with law firms is, oh, well, if I buy it, what if the clients leave, right? Because I'm a new person. And we have a way to deal with that, and we can talk about that as well. But in an internal transaction, you've got a senior lawyer, and not necessarily older lawyer, but a lawyer who's experienced, right? So experienced lawyer who's already with the firm, who knows all of the people inside, who knows the clients, who's done work for these people, right? So there's just a natural trust transition that goes on. And so the likelihood of clients leaving is much, much lower, if not nearly zero.
Okay, so I want to dive into the dynamics a little bit. And there's really two sides of the coin, as you know. You've got the person that's transitioning out or says they want to, but oftentimes I think they have a hard time letting go. They may have extremely unrealistic expectations. They may say they want out, but really they don't. So how do you deal with that, and what have you sort of seen?
One of the most important questions I ask people when they tell me they want out of their firm is, what is your second act? Like, what are you going to do after you sell your firm? And there's a little story I learned early on when I was working for that attorney in the transactional area. We had a client who had created this business, and this is in the 90s, and somebody came and wanted to buy it from him for millions of dollars, right? So he basically created a multi-million-dollar asset out of zero. And here I am, I'm a young guy. I'm like, holy crap, that's wonderful. I mean, you're making millions of dollars. And this guy was so excited when he first started talking to us. But as the closing got closer and closer, it got worse and worse. He was just downright unhappy, as this was going on. And the reality was, his business was his life. He did it all the time. It's all he thought about, right? And so the thought that now he would have nothing was scaring him, right? So the money's great, but what am I going to do every day? And so I always ask that question of lawyers: what is the second act? Right? So what are you going to do? Great. You can play golf for a month. You can fish for a month, whatever. You can do all of that. That's like an extended vacation. But what are you really going to do after that?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it. It's huge. You've got I call it the die at your desk folks who just say, I'm never going to quit. Now, it doesn't mean you don't transition your ownership. You can still practice all you want, but you got that sort of contingent. Then you got some that are just, they can't get away fast enough. And then you've got the ones that, maybe want to get out, but they can't because their financial house is not necessarily in order. Yeah. But let's talk about the other side of the dynamic, and that's the senior associate or the other attorney. I'm curious your experience, but I can tell you some of the things I've seen. So, as a generalization, lawyers are a risk-averse bunch. As a generalization, they're not sitting on piles of capital. And when they're presenting with the offer to buy ownership into a firm, some of them are like, hell yeah, I'm doing it. But others are like, nope, not going to do it. And then, I'm sure you've run the numbers, but the way I sort of look at it is, you'll see at $100,000, you have any investment you can put it into. You can put it in a savings account or a money market account or the S&P or real estate or whatever, and get some expected return. And if you run the numbers on a law firm, usually it's going to exceed any return you get anywhere else, but they still don't want to buy in. So what have you seen on the sort of the buy-in side?
It's actually been, to me, it's shocking because and I think it's partly because if you haven't been an owner, you don't really see what it's like to be an owner. And so, we do our deals like typically somebody's coming in, they don't have cash. So the owner, the lawyer who is the senior lawyer, is financing 100% of that purchase price. And we structure it so that it's all paid for with the profits that come out of the law firm, right? So, if somebody said to you, buy an operating business for zero down and the business will pay for itself, would you say no? But I've seen lawyers say no to that, which just boggles my mind.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. So, you're not going to get beyond a person who just is so risk averse that is just something that's beyond their capability, right? And that's a personality issue you're going to have to figure out early on, because if you're hiring somebody to be your successor, you have to understand that person has to be somewhat entrepreneurial, right? They can't be a maverick entrepreneur, and they can't be somebody who just wants a regular paycheck and no risk whatsoever. They have to be somewhere in the middle. So that's the personality piece. But then the conversation about how you introduce this is so crucial, because the minute you bring this to an attorney in your office and you say, "Hey, we're going to have you buy in," what they're thinking is, "Oh, I already have a mortgage. I don't want another one, right? It's just going to be more money I have to put out every month." And so you've got to explain how the firm pays for itself. And so we do that running through numbers with them. And that's the other thing you face, is that most attorneys are just absolutely 100% not numbers people, right? And so it's got to be a very step by step. Here's how we did this. Here's what this looks like. Here's how we're doing this, right? To get them comfortable with the numbers. And typically takes a couple of meetings to really work this stuff out.
So another question I see a lot, or statement I'll say, a lot of lawyers out there, they just say, my practice is not worth anything. Nobody would ever want to buy it. Why in the world would they want to buy it? What would you say to those kind of people?
Unfortunately, for a lot of lawyers, it's true, right? They own a job, they don't have a practice. So, but the reality is, look, if you've got a practice and you've been doing this for a while, you have a client base, you've got an annuity. People keep coming back, or at least come to you because they were referred by other people who know that you do a good job. Now, if it's only you doing that good job, you are absolutely right. There is no practice there. But if you've got a team and you set that team up properly to do the work, to take care of the clients, then yeah, you've got a business, and you can slot somebody else into that business. Now, you're not going to get up and walk away, right? And I think, it's important to understand there are really three types of law firms in the world, right? So there's this, what I call a process firm, which is very, bankruptcy, for example, where it's do the work and process as much as you can through. There's more relationship firm, which would be like commercial litigation and that kind of thing, where there is an ongoing relationship. And then there's brain surgery firms, which, you're hiring the lawyer who's specifically known for this one little, very narrow issue, and you're doing it because it's a bet the farm issue, right? And so when you're talking about process firms, you may be able to walk away. But for most firms, as the owner, when I bring somebody else in, either through an external or an internal transaction, I have to stay around, because the clients and the clients and the referral sources have to understand that things are going to stay the same. They're not going to change that much. And so when we do an external sale, we typically do that as an of counsel arrangement, so that that person's there to answer questions and do those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So even in a relationship, or even in the brain surgery practice, you've spent your entire career putting your name out there and developing relationships. There are avenues. It may not be a, hey, I'm getting a check and I'm walking away the next day kind of thing. But if you connect yourself through of counsel, some other relationship, there's a way to at least somewhat monetize the assets that you have built, which are like the relationships or whatever, or the name. And so,
right.
And shutting down a law practice and walking away doesn't happen. You don't just go in and turn the lights out. It takes time, it takes money, it takes effort. So you're going to have to do that anyway. It may be a little bit easier to step somewhere else and at least get somewhat of a revenue stream out of it,
Absolutely. I've had conversations with people who come into me and say, well, I'm looking at this because I don't want to shut down the practice, because then they realize, oh, well, wait a second. I got to find places for the cases or finish the cases out, right? I got to write out the lease, right? I have to keep my people for as long as I possibly can to finish out the cases. And then I got to get the files to somebody who's going to, either the former client or somebody who's going to it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so they're the people out there that basically have the jobs, we'll call it, the owners that have the jobs. But they're like, wait a second, maybe I can prepare and position this thing to at least do some sort of sale. What are some of the things that a law firm owner could do now to begin to set up their firm in such a way that it might be attractive to a buyer somewhere down the road? And the one other piece I'll add is, when should they start? What kind of runway do they need, really, in your mind, to set this up?
Yeah, the runway piece. That's always a good question, because I'll get calls from people who want to be out by the end of the year, and you're like, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't do anything for you, right? And it's a kind of it depends answer. So just to be a good lawyer, it depends, right? The perfect answer is you've got 10 years before you want to do it, right? Because you can bring people on, you can transition out slowly. People, the clients, the referral sources, you can transition that goodwill very slowly. All sorts of good things can happen. I like 5 years because 5 years is a good number. If you bring an internal person in 5 years and you self-finance a 10% or greater interest in the firm, then when they own that 10% or greater interest under the current SBA rules, they can go get a partner buyout loan and buy the founder out of the firm, and then essentially amortize that over like a 10-year period. And so that can be really nice. And it kind of gets you started on that path. So I like the 5-year number. So, but if I was starting today and I didn't, I was like, hey, being truthful to myself, I got a job, right? So what am I going to do? Number one, hire people who can take the non-legal work off your desk. Even if you don't think you can afford them, hire them, because that's the most important thing you can do. You certainly shouldn't be keeping your own books. You certainly shouldn't be setting your own appointments, et cetera, all of those things. And then go out and get that marketing system rolling. So make it an actual system and a process, not a hit and miss, so that there's a calendar, there's a list of referral sources, you're touching those referral sources once every 90 days, and so make it a systematic process. There's a lot of content out there about how to do a referral marketing system very well, and I would definitely take a look at that. And then I would also do a print newsletter. By far, the most important thing you can do to stay connected with the people who are sending you business or are invested some way in your practice.
All right. I want to talk about that print newsletter for sure. I'm about to launch mine. I want to dig in a little bit there. But yeah, I'm with you. So I think minimum 3 years, probably at least 5. 10 is better. And I tell people, at least the ones that are starting now, it's like, go ahead and start planning now. I mean, it may be 20, 30, 40 years from now, but the things you do now and just having the mindset. I mean, it's really a lot of the mindset.
Huge.
Instead of you're just driving as fast as you can and then the cliff is there. And as you're falling over the cliff, you're trying to put it together and do something, No, you want to build the ramp and the wings and the parachute, everything, so you're ready when you go off, right?
Right.
So let's talk about that.
That sounds like an Evel Knievel reference.
I know. So print newsletter real quick. So we've talked about that a little bit. What's your experience with that? Most lawyers, I mean, we sort of play in a world where a lot of the lawyers are doing that, but I would say most lawyers out there, they've never even heard of it. They think it's just completely foreign to them. So what's your experience with the print newsletter and, number one, doing it and then generating referrals and business out of it?
So I know it works because whenever we send it out, I get comments on the articles that are in there, right? We use Zine Graphics to do ours. Kia is fantastic. We've worked with her to do the book covers and, the marketing and those types of things. So yeah, so I would recommend Zine because they do a really good job. But if you don't, in that case, we're writing a couple of the articles. So I'll write an article and Faith will write an article, and it'll be very personal. So this latest issue was about our daughter's wedding in Italy that we went to. And I got great comments, people coming, oh, this is fantastic. You love Bellagio, that kind of thing. So I know people look at it and I know they see it. And frankly, even if they don't, if they throw it out, my name and picture is at the top. So I'm, boom, top of mind awareness right then and there. So it's a wonderful investment, and I have gotten referrals off of it. People will, like, we can see when it goes out that we will get calls from people. So there is a direct correlation. Could I tell you there's an ROI, a specific ROI or something like that? No.
So do you do it monthly, or is it every other month? How often do you do it?
Every other month. Yeah. And then we do it to about, I think we have 400 or 500 people on the list. I may be a little bit high on that. Maybe we have an e-newsletter too. And I don't remember what the distinction between the two was, but I thought the e-newsletter was probably in the thousands, and the print newsletter was, right around that 400, something like that.
It's interesting. So I've had a weekly email newsletter for years. And it's been effective for me, although often goes in spam. People unsubscribe. They don't look at it. There's all these things. And my view is always, hey, I want to give them a short piece of value that very quickly they can look at and just delete it and not feel overwhelmed. I get some email newsletters that are just so long and dense that even if it's something that I think I want to read, I'm like, I'll come back, and I never do. But my attitude was sort of, if they just see my name, that's good enough. But the print newsletter, they hold it, They really see your name. They can't just hit delete or unsubscribe because it's coming next month or whatever, right?
Right.
So there's some more.
I guess they could call you and tell you not to bother them anymore, but no, I've never had that happen.
Well, you're still going to get it. So there's some other marketing things you do that I definitely want to touch on. But before we get there, another part of your practice, I think, is sort of valuation. So a question I get a lot is, what's my firm worth, or how do I figure out what it's worth? So how would you answer that question?
So the value of a firm or any business is a function of two factors. The first is, how much money does it generate? And the second is, what's the likelihood that money is going to continue to be generated, right? And so the first thing that we do is we find out what is the cash flow. And there's different measures of cash flow. The one that we're typically looking at is either owner benefit or EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And so this may not come as a surprise to you, Jonathan, but sometimes lawyers put personal expenses in the business. I don't know. I'm shocked by it. So what we do is we back out those personal expenses. And then there are some times where we have to actually increase expenses. We just had this the other day. The lawyer owned the building they were in and paid no rent. So obviously they wouldn't rent it to a buyer for nothing. And so we have to put in what the market rent would be if the buyer came in and rented that building. Right. And same thing like a working spouse. So if you have a spouse that comes in and you don't pay them, you got to adjust the salary to a market rate for somebody to come in, that kind of thing. So that gives us the cash flow. And then the risk factor is basically all about some of the things we talked about a minute ago, which is, well, are these matters coming in? Is the lawyer everything? Right? Does the lawyer make all the decisions? Does the lawyer talk with is the lawyer do everything in this process? That is the highest risk firm that you can get. And most people aren't going to buy that. Or if they buy it, they're only going to buy it on an earn out basis. Right. And then the other side of that is, I've got a team and I've got intake, and I only look at the biggest cases, or I only get involved in one or two pieces of the legal pie where I'm best at it, or something to that effect, right? And so you've got a marketing system, you've got a intake system, you've got a case production system, all of those things that's a real business, right? So that's not going to be one where when it transfers to a buyer, all that revenue is going to go away. And so that will give you a higher multiple. So typically you get a multiple of the cash flow, right? And that multiple is going to vary depending on the risk. But we subscribe to databases. And so we'll compare the firm against other firms that have sold that are in that database, both in terms of their metrics and in terms of the previous transactions. And that'll give us an idea of what the multiplier will be. And then we can adjust the multiplier based on that risk profile that we have. So if the very low risk profile, will bump that multiple up for a very high risk, it's going to come down quite a ways.
It's interesting. I say this all the time. You can't, as an owner, it's your firm. You've got the vision. You've got the direction. You can't be completely absentee, for sure. But the irony is the less the firm depends on you, the more valuable it becomes in the eyes of somebody else, right? I mean, for all those reasons you just went through. And so, to the extent you can strive to sort of detach yourself, at least from the day-to-day operations. Again, you're going to be the driver, the visionary, the one that pushes it. No one's ever going to care as much as you do. But for all the other things, remove yourself. Another thing I see a lot of, and I think we've talked about this, but it's when a lawyer says, oh, my firm is, 60% profit every year. And then the question is, well, what do you mean by profit? So tell me I think I agree with you on this, but what's your definition of profit in a law firm, for a law firm owner, we'll call it?
Yeah, so you have to be, as the law firm owner, you have to be compensated at fair market value, and everybody in the firm has to be compensated at fair market value. What's left is the profit, right? And what you're talking about there is a proxy for profit is EBITDA, right? Because you're taking out the non-cash expenses. And so that really is a good way to get to what a profit number should be. Now, the thing that we focus most on is owner benefit. Depending on the firm size, that's going to be a better multiple to look at. In other words, the data to look at than necessarily an EBITDA, because EBITDA typically are firms that are going to be, north of probably 4 or 5 million, right? And so you can kind of take a look at that. And in any event, that'll give you an idea. And you should be, if you look at SDE, so owner's benefit should be like 35 to 40%. That includes your salary. It includes the car that the firm pays for you and the travel that the firm and all of that should be 35 to 40%. And that's a real number. If you have 60% quote unquote profit and you've backed out a salary for yourself, you must be working, 80 hours a week, or your associates are incredibly underpaid, or something is going on there because it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, the other exception would be if you're a high-end plaintiff's trial lawyer and you're popping multi-million-dollar verdicts every year, every other year. That's going to skew for sure. And
but Jonathan, the one thing to think about there is you can get that high in a year, but the reality is those cases are going to take a significant amount of work. So year over year, if you were to smooth out you get a verdict in 2023, but you worked on it from 2020 all the way on to 2023, right? So you got to smooth that revenue over the entire period to make it reflect what the reality is, right? And so it looks great for 23. Oh my God, our profitability is 60%. That's wonderful. But it likely means that if that was one big thing going through your firm, there's one huge case, that your profitability was lower in the years when you were doing the work on that case. So that's why we like to smooth it to make it reflect a little bit more of reality.
That's a great point. Although I do know some firms that are basically doing that multiple times every year. It's crazy. But to that, it's because of the performance of a certain attorney. They're just really good trial lawyers and they attract the cases. That kind of firm is hard to sell. I'm not sure you can.
Yeah, that's a brain surgery firm.
So,
yeah.
So another question, I don't know, you mentioned 35 to 40%, and it depends on the firm. I mean, you've got, for example, some of these high volume firms that maybe advertise a lot or they require a lot of bodies to process the work. They may be on the lower end of the profitability versus some of the, more higher end work might be on the higher end of the profitability. But what should a firm really shoot for, generally speaking? And if it's below a certain number, what's the number that warning sirens should be going off? You got a problem. You need to fix this.
If you're below 20%, the warning sirens should go off, right? And even if you're a really high volume firm with a lot of bodies, you should really be at 25%, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at it, you were mentioning it before about investments, right? There's if you look at those investments that you're just talking about before, like, oh, I can go buy a T-bill. Well, there's zero risk of that, right? I'm going to get my money back or the world is going to end. One of those two things is going to happen, right? But on the other end is, I can invest in high growth stocks, right? And so my return on investment on those high growth stocks should be in the 18 to 20% range historically because of the risk. Those things could go away. So the thing that's more risky is your law firm. So if you can take the money and put it into high growth stocks with less risk than your law firm and you make more than your law firm, you should do that because your law firm's not a good investment, right? And so when you start to see you go below 25%, that's the really critical warning sign that, hey, your law firm is not becoming a good investment. Of course, you got to back out all the stuff that you get out of the law firm, right? So important to do that.
So this may be a good segue into some of your marketing stuff. You've got some really cool marketing things going on. And one of those is you've got this thing called the Scale to Exit program, which I love the name. And that may be part of the analysis that we've sort of gone through a little bit today. But what is the Scale to Exit program?
It's the 3 to 5 step program that we take lawyers through. So the first thing is we want to do that reality check that I talked about before. Where are you today? And then what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? Then from there, we do kind of this feedback, right? So we go over everything with the lawyer so that they can evaluate, is this going to make it? Is this going to work for me or not? And then based on that, they get to decide, hey, what's basically choosing their exit. So which is the best thing for me now? And that's where we go with 3 options. We got the internal transaction. We have let's grow the firm. So spend some time doing some key things that are going to add a lot of value to the firm. And then the other is let's go for an outside exit.
And so who is that program for? Is it for, anybody who thinks they may want to sell? Obviously, if they want to sell in 3 months, that's probably not for them. Is there an ideal sort of client that would be a good fit for this program?
Well, anybody who is looking to sell and has, 3 years or more before they need to sell is going to be a great candidate for the program. The key to this program is you got to have the mindset that really got to grow the firm. If you come into the program burnt out, then it's not going to work for you. You've got to come in with the mindset that I'm going to make some changes that are going to benefit me in the long run. And so I'm willing to kind of maybe change my mindset a little bit if you don't have that right now, right? A lot of lawyers do have that, but if you don't have the mindset, is let's get the mindset right so we can start to bring people on or do the things you need to do to make this firm saleable and to have a really successful exit.
So yeah, I think that's really cool that you've trademarked that name, right? Well, you should. So yeah, when we get off, I'm not a trademark attorney. Go for it. So another thing you're really good at and you've done in the marketing side is you've got a number of books that you've published, and which, I'm working on one. It's going to take me forever, but I've got the outline I'm sketching out. But, I guess take us through your process of the books and sort of how has that been helpful in marketing your practice?
So the first book I did in 2005, and I had written a lot of blog posts and things like this about kind of mistakes that people made in their businesses. And so I just put them all together, and then I edited it for way too long, and then I went and got it published. It actually had started out as, it's funny because, Ben talks about this. It actually started out as a photocopied kind of special report. And then it got expanded as I added stories and things like that to it. And so I brought that everywhere. In 2005, I was looking for business. I would hand that out to anybody who wanted it, that kind of thing. And it really got people to, send me stuff, which is what I wanted in 2005. And then interestingly enough, I made it into a book. And then, I don't know, there's something about like, hey, I got a book, and people love that. And they're really impressed by it, which is great. And so then I, waited a while. I kind of ran that one out, and then I started other books, and in 2018, I don't know, it just seemed to get really prolific and do a whole bunch of books at once. So we did the partnership guide, we did the buying a business guide, we did Florida entities and all that. And then the final one that we did was the guide to selling your Florida law practice. And that one has really been helpful for a lot of lawyers. So,
yeah, I think that's really cool. So a new project you've done, or new-ish, is you've started a podcast now, which I think is really great. You pump out some really good information on there. Your solo episodes are really good. You talk about some of the things we've talked about. And so any lawyer out there that is thinking about selling or not, I still think they should listen. So what's the name of that podcast?
Law Deals.
All right, everybody, go out there and subscribe to that. So we've been going a while, but I do have a few more questions. So have you seen any, there's all this talk about non-attorney ownership in law firms. Everybody, we know Arizona, DC has sort of had a version of it for quite a while. Have you seen anything? Are you hearing anything on that front?
Well, Florida rejected it outright. I mean, I think the vote was unanimous rejection of it for the Board of Governors, probably about a year, maybe even a year and a half ago. So I don't see it coming to Florida too soon. It's interesting to me because everybody's worried about private equity getting into this. And I think if you're a high volume plaintiff's personal injury, bankruptcy, one of those process firms we were talking about, I think there's some risk for you in that. A lot of the firms don't have the returns required by private equity. So, maybe that's not such a big issue. And I don't see them, necessarily doing anything in the, individual like estate planning or something like that, right? It's a little bit too fragmented, I think, for that to work with their type of model. But the real benefit for lawyers, and the thing that I think is short-sighted, is that, like me, I have a partner in the business brokerage who is a guy, super intelligent, really good business deals. He's an ASA, which is a valuation guy. And would I love to have him as a partner in my law firm? Absolutely, positively, right? And so I think that there would be value for, that type of thing. If you're a family lawyer and you've got a really good psychologist or something like that, and you want to keep them, come bring them in. They can be a minority interest holder in the firm and still not direct what goes on. And the CPAs have had this for a while, right? Because you can be a non-CPA owner or owners up to 49% interest in the firm. And that's wonderful because they can bring on the consultants and they can do all the things that they want to do and have them as partners. So I think there's value for the legal industry in it. I think maybe the concern is a little overblown, kind of like AI, but yeah.
I'm with you. And another distinction I would make is like all of your staff, not even like a high level executive level. I mean, like, even your receptionists, if you wanted to give them a little piece and at least having the flexibility to do that, it would align interests, everybody feel like they're rowing in the same direction. In theory, at least, they might work a little harder because they're like, hey, if I do, and they'll bring you ideas. I mean, I think it would open up some opportunities. I mean, I do know that you can profit share with your staff and all that. Most states allow that, generally speaking, subject to certain rules. But I just feel like internal ownership of non-lawyers, I see no reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. It's just sort of crazy to me, but we'll wait and see, right?
Agreed.
We'll wait and see.
Yes.
So you've been at it for a long time with your own firm. You've advised many law firms. For those law firm owners out there, any words of wisdom on, or advice on operating their firm, getting it set up to be more profitable or potentially to sell one day?
Lawyers, I think, have a tendency to want to be the hero and to do everything, right? And have this idea that nobody can do it as good as I can. And the most important thing you can do is change that mindset to, you cannot do this alone, and you have to have a team behind you. But that team is not going to do everything the way you want it done exactly. And you're going to have to live with that because that's the only way that the practice is going to serve you, your team, and your clients. And that's, honestly, if you don't do that, you will be burned out. You won't have a practice that you can sell, and life is going to suck.
Yes. I bet you there's people out there experiencing that right now.
I'm sure there is.
Well, this has been real fun. So for people out there that want to get in touch with you, maybe explore the Scale to Exit program, what's the best way to find you?
Well, you can go to alexanderbusinesslaw.com, and the Scale to Exit program there is on the services. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and it's Attorney Ed Alexander in Orlando, Florida. So love to hear from anybody. And then if you want the book on the guide to selling your Florida law practice, which, by the way, the only reason it says Florida there is because I referenced the Florida rules, the bar rules in there, but it really would apply to any state. But ultimately, you can go there to lawfirmexitsuccess.com, lawfirmexitsuccess.com.
Nice. Ed, thank you for coming on. I look forward to seeing you in person in October, right?
Same here.
All right. Awesome.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Cool.
Good.
Well, appreciate it.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.yourlawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.